Welcome to the Sister Soul Circle. While we know there is turmoil, uncertainty, and chaos surrounding us, we, as the Office of Alumni Engagement, wanted to provide a space for our alumni sisters to breathe, bond, and build up one another. Therefore, the Sister Soul Circle was created. Sundays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we invite you to join us while we create shared experiences of learning, loving, and exploring different topics associated with mental and physical wellness, self care, social justice, interactive cooking demos, and so much more. We will look to you to suggest topics for further sessions and invite you to volunteer to potentially share your expertise with our alumni community. While we are unable to solve the world's problems in an hour-long Zoom event, we want to share ways for you to take care of your most valuable resource, and that is you. We are all experiencing so many challenges in relation to a world health pandemic, as well as the pandemic of racism, both heavily targeting people from the African diaspora in this country. Please take a moment with us as we practice self-care, as we have all heard the adage, you cannot pour from an empty cup. Take care of yourself first. Thank you for joining us.
Danielle Moore is your host for today, but I will go ahead and get started until we're able to fix whatever technical difficulties that we might be having. My name is Alison Shumperdorsey. I am class of 2002 in the Office of Alumni Engagement, and I welcome you to our fifth Sister Soul Circle. We're very excited to bring to you two of our alum. In the session, where do we go from here? The power of intergenerational alliances, which our panelists are Mary Pat Hector, class of 2019, and Dr. Cynthia Neal Spitz, class of 78, and also a professor currently at Spelman College, and also was dean when I was a student, as some of the other members that will be on this call today will remember that. So we just want to welcome you. So we know that there is a lot of turmoil and uncertainty and chaos that has been surrounding us for quite some time. And with all that was going on, we as the Office of Alumni Engagement wanted to provide a space for our alumni sisters to breathe, bond, and build up one another. Therefore, the Sister Soul Circle was created. So every Sunday at 3 p.m., in June, we invited you to come and create. But we just had various sessions that we wanted to make sure that we were able to provide alumni a way to join together and to learn various topics from our very own sisters. So we continue to have you give your suggestions for future months and invite you to volunteer to potentially share your expertise with our alumni community. So for our speakers, we have Mary Pat Hector, class of 2019. She is a native of Atlanta and a recent graduate of Spelman College. At the age of 12, she grew a community service project into a nonprofit called Youth in Action USA. By age 19, she became the youngest woman and person of color to run for public office in the state of Georgia, losing by only 22 votes. At 22 years old, Mary Pat served as the National Youth Director for National Action Network, one of the country's largest civil rights organizations. Through her duties in NON, Mary Pat led and organized hunger strikes that have gained more than 75,000 meals for students at HBCUs, developing an initiative to end student hunger on college campuses. One of her proudest accomplishments is beginning a Fellow of Peace First. She was awarded a $50,000 fellowship for her national campaign, Think Twice, which educates youth on nonviolence and other issues crippling her generation. In addition to her duties at NON, Mary Pat also serves as the leader for Usher's New Look Foundation. Now, both Mary Pat and Dr. Spence have some quite lengthy bios, and we will share their website so you can read all of the wonderful things that they have done. All right, so our next speaker, Dr. Cynthia Neal Spence, class of 78, is Associate Professor of Sociology at Spelman College and is the Director of the UNCF Mellons Program. As director of the UNCF Mellon Programs, Dr. Spence creates, manages, and oversees a suite of future faculty development and faculty career enhancement programs for UNCF, for the United Negro College Fund, students and faculty. Under her leadership, students are groomed to enter the PhD pipeline, and faculty throughout the UNCF consortium are supported in their development as teachers and scholars. The UNCF Mellons Program Office is housed at Spelman College and is funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Dr. Spence serves as the director of the Spelman College Social Justice Program. Social Justice Program is a living and learning community program that attempts to match students' intellectual interests with their social justice advocacy passions. She is committed to helping Spelman women fully actualize their commitment to making a choice to change the world through social justice advocacy. Dr. Spence serves as the director of Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation Center, an initiative sponsored by the American Association of Colleges and Universities. Dr. Spence is a graduate of Spelman College, where she earned her BA degree. She earned both her master's and PhD degrees from Rutgers University and is married to Harold W. Spence, and they are the proud parents of 2 daughters, Christy and Courtney. So without further ado, I am going to turn the program over to Dr. Spence and to Mary Pat Hector.
Thank you all for being here, and I'm really happy to share this discussion with one of my mentees, Mary Pat Hector, who is an amazing young woman who you're going to hear more about, because most of you probably have heard her name before. But we decided that we wanted to join with alums in talking about kind of the power of intergenerational alliances. And clearly you cannot work at a place like Spelman College as a faculty member or as a staff member without engaging in intergenerational discussions and alliances. We learn so much from the students that we teach. So not only are we responsible for teaching them, but many of them are actually teaching us and helping us begin to make new meanings of what we are observing, and those new meanings are often based in our own understandings that come out of our particular positions and our own historical context. And so in order to begin this, I've been doing a lot of discussions lately with groups that want to talk about race and racism, but also wish to talk about this particular moment in time. And one of the quotes that I found to be very helpful as kind of a centering quote is one by Wangari Maathai, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004. She's the first African woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, and she won it for her work in the area of environmental justice. Primarily, she was focused in on environmental sustainability issues and concerns. And when she was delivering her speech, she thought and reflected much about her work in the environmental science and environmental justice space, but she thought about environmental sustainability goes well beyond kind of the ecological concerns that many are focused on, but really thought long and hard about what does it mean to sustain our world? What does it mean to sustain our communities? And at that point, her quote was, "In the course of history, there comes a time when humanity is called to shift to a new level of consciousness, to reach a higher moral ground, a time when we have to shed our fear and give hope to each other. That time is now." Now, although this quote was in 2004, I think that it is clearly appropriate as we begin to think about and reflect upon and experience the moment that we are existing in right now, where we are in fact in our homes. We're doing a virtual engagement because of COVID-19, and so we're dealing with a global pandemic. But we are also dealing with the realities of a pandemic that we have all lived through and experienced all of our lives and all of the history of the US, but also this is a global pandemic, but for purposes of this discussion, we talk about in the US, and that is the pandemic of systemic and structural racism. And when I talk about systemic and structural racism, I'm talking about the fact that not only is racism present, alive and well in the larger structures in our society, and certainly we will talk about, law enforcement, but we know that within the corporate environment, within government, racism is in fact alive and present. And so it does in fact reflect, and it is embedded within the larger social structures of society that regulate our lives on a day-to-day basis. But it is also systemic. There is a system that racism cannot operate alone. They have to be ways in which is systematized. And so one act of racism or racist act is very much dependent upon another act. One entity that is in fact affecting policies that can in fact be defined as racist is dependent upon other structures in society to enforce those policies. And so we'll talk a lot more about that. But when I go back to this particular quote, it's time for a shift. What we're seeing, we believe that our country is shifting. We believe our world communities are shifting. And so Wangari Maathai in 2004 in many ways predicted this moment, because that time is now. And so as we look at kind of shifting consciousness, one of the things that we've been thinking about, or one of the observations that I continue to hear, is that the George Floyd moment was in fact perhaps a tipping point for the country, for the global community. We have protests in the streets all over the world. Another indicator of the tipping point is that in fact the diversity of those individuals who are protesting. So again, you see more diverse audiences of individuals that are saying that it's time to shift. It's time to shift our consciousness. We are seeing mass protests all over the world. As I stated, Juneteenth became a subject of the media last week. Many of whom had never heard of Juneteenth, so it was our job to educate them about Juneteenth. June 19th, 1865, a good 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was in fact declared, where individuals who were enslaved found out that they had in fact been emancipated. But we all know that story. We also know what that emancipation actually provided. It actually provided just a different way of being enslaved by a structure that was already in place, a structure that was in place that believed very much in a hierarchy of human value based on race. And certainly we were not the ones on the top tier of the hierarchy. But as we look at these visual images, though, we do see changes that are occurring. We see Confederate monuments that are coming down or that are being threatened to come down. We see the Black Lives Matter signs everywhere. And certainly this is not new. Clearly, after the Trayvon Martin case, we began to see individuals embracing the Black Lives Matter as a slogan, as a phrase, as t-shirts. I've got several t-shirts of my own, and I'm sure you all do as well. As I think about it, and I've looked at, a lot of the work that's come out, the things that I'm reading, I'm reading Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. I was reminded of a text I read a couple of years ago, The Making of Black Lives Matter by Christopher LeBron. And he does a historical analysis and really kind of situates the notion of Black Lives Matter as not a new phenomenon, but yes, it is in fact the outcry that perhaps was not voiced in the same way, but it's the same outcry as we heard from individuals like Ida B. Wells, Frederick Douglass, Audre Lorde, Angela Davis, Anna Julia Cooper. We've been talking about Black Lives Matter for a very, very long time. And so as we move forward, our challenge is, how do we move from talking about Black Lives Matter to actually acting upon Black Lives Matter? And that's why we have to engage in the structural analysis of systemic racism that exists in our society. At Spelman College, we say that our slogan is making a choice to change the world. Now, I will tell you, when I ask Spelman students, what is the motto for Spelman College? They say, making a choice to change the world. And that's absolutely fine with me. But again, this has in fact been embedded in the cultural fabric of Spelman College. It is the language that we use. And so I decided in 2011 that I wanted to give that language a little bit more meaning. And so I developed the social justice program. And the purpose of the social justice program was actually to create a living and learning space for students so that they could begin to see, how do you make a choice to change the world? It's a wonderful saying, but how do we actually animate it? How do we actually activate that language? And so our goal is to make a choice to change the world through social justice advocacy. I wanted the students to know that Spelman College has always been committed to community service, and we always will be. But my question is, why is there such a great need for community service, particularly within the communities of minoritized individuals, marginalized populations? What is it about the larger social structure that needs to be excavated, needs to be interrogated in order for us to gain a more just and equal society? And so clearly, if you've been over to Laura Spelman, you've seen our mural. And this mural was created for the purpose of making certain that our students knew that your cries for Black Lives Matter and your cries for social justice are not new cries. These are cries that we have been, in fact, as Black women, been engaged in from the beginning of time. This particular mural periodizes the various symbols of Black Lives Matter, of various Black women scholars and activists who've been engaged in social justice work since 1881. And so we come together in this particular space to talk about, how do we go about doing social change? Who are our leaders? Who were the individuals who came before us? And certainly, I can't say that this is a novel idea. We know that we've had women at Spelman College for a very long time who've talked about social change. To your left, you see Rosalind Polk, who is a student in 1960, who's primarily responsible for the crafting of an appeal to human rights. Again, this appeal to human rights was about Black Lives Matter, folks, and students are going to take the leadership. And if you've heard from Rosalind Polk, she talks about that there were tensions here. There were faculty members who did not believe that Spelman women should be involved in activism. There were parents who believed that their daughters should, in fact, just go to your classes, keep your nose to the grindstone, and just leave all that civil rights stuff alone. But Rosalind Pope was not going to be satisfied with that. And so she joined with other members of the Atlanta University Center to craft an appeal to human rights, which is a beautiful document, well crafted, well said. But you know what? She could have been talking about today. In the appeal to human rights, they were speaking about educational inequities, job insecurities, housing discrimination, voting rights, hospitals. They were looking at healthcare. They were looking at the various ways that systemic and structural racism were, in fact, marginalizing and minoritizing and devaluing individuals of color. So the social justice leaning and the social justice framing of the lives of Spelman women is certainly not new. What we tried to do was to create a platform so that we could continue to engage our students in ways that they could, in fact, make a difference. And certainly on the right-hand side, we've got Stacey Abrams, who I know that all of us share a great amount of pride for. Stacey Abrams, we know, should actually be the governor of Georgia. but because of voter suppression, she is not. But she did not allow that to knock her down. She knew why she didn't become governor, and so she decided to take her energy elsewhere to actually create an organization so that voter suppression and voter access and voter education could be more broadly shared. And we also know that Stacey has made such a national name for herself because of her intellect, because of her passion and her commitment to social justice, that she's been on the list of possible potential candidates for vice president. So again, Spelman has a history of social justice engagement. Spelman College has a history of responding to the moment. And that's what we're doing here. And so as I was developing the social justice program, I began to look at different students who were at Spelman to invite them to come and become members of the social justice program. But there was one young woman who had not even begun her tenure at Spelman College. I was attending a luncheon that was hosted by the Center for Civil and Human Rights. And at that particular luncheon, there was a young high school student who was being awarded for her activism as a high school student. And I said to myself, she belongs at Spelman. And I went over and talked with her, and sure enough, she told me that she was in fact applying to Spelman College and that she was looking forward to potentially coming. And that was Mary Pat Hector, a young woman who has in her bio shares with you that she's been involved in social justice causes for a very long time. And so Mary Pat came to Spelman, immediately became a member of the social justice program, and she and I have worked collaboratively ever since her coming to Spelman. She even had me out at a protest march, y'all, in the middle of COVID-19, but I was there with my mask on and I attended because Mary Pat told me, you need to be here because this particular protest march is going to be focusing in on the women and girls whose names are not often listed, or the women and girls' names that are not often called when we talk about Black Lives Matter, even though we know that the Black Lives Matter movement was in fact founded by 3 Black queer women, but you never hear their names. It is that particular movement, although it is very important and it is certainly significant, it focuses though primarily on the lost lives of Black males. And certainly we must focus on the lost lives of Black males, but we also must say her name. We also must look at the ways in which the systemic racism, structural heterosexism are in fact debilitating factors in the lives of women and girls as well. And so my mentee, who I have an intergenerational alliance with, Mary Pat Hector, called me and told me I needed to be at a protest. And I said, yes, ma'am, I will be there. And so without any further ado, I will ask Mary Pat to come and share her story. And then we will open it up and just we'll talk about this moment. And we will talk about the ways that we can all strategize to make certain that we are contributing to making the world a better place. Mary Pat.
Yes, and I do have to say that Dr. Spence was very modest in talking about herself and the work that she does with the Social Justice Fellows. If you know anything about the Social Justice Program, Dr. Spence really has her hand full with just the members in the Social Justice Program. And I know we've all probably gotten her called in the president's office numerous times. I know I have. So I do want to say thank you so much, Dr. Spence, for all of the work that you do in supporting your rebel-rousing students in the social justice program. I know I was a headache. But one thing that I will say, and Dr. mentioned, really just the women, you know, during the beginning of this movement, I really took the death of Breonna Taylor personally. And I feel that it just breaks my heart that a lot of us, when we think about movements like Black Lives Matter or even the civil rights movement, the first thing people think about are the Black men that contributed a lot to the movement itself, or the civil rights movement, when in fact it was women that organized and mobilized to get us the Civil Rights Act that we never talk about. We'll never know their names. And it's the women that have been putting on these protests and marches and ensuring that people are safe, ensuring that there's water at these protests so no one's dehydrated, going above and beyond to ensure the safety of people when they're outside. And I felt when Dr. Spence mentioned that protest, that those women weren't given a platform or a space to speak, or even mourn our sisters that were killed. And so I want to thank you, Dr. Spence, for attending that particular protest in Atlanta, but we have so much work to do. But you also talked about the importance of just having that intergenerational relationship or conversation. And I believe that at the beginning of what we witnessed as being the resurgence of the civil rights movement, that was missing. Mm-hmm. I was very surprised and shocked to see so many elders in our community that like illegally sat at lunch counters and illegally walked across bridges and demanded that they be treated as human. Look at what we were witnessing amongst these young people, like the same generation that people thought only cared about social media, the same generation that people thought, you know, we're going to fail. They changed the world. And it just really took me by surprise that these same people didn't see the importance of what young people today were doing and what this movement was supposed to be. And so you also mentioned, you know, a power shift, and you talked about Stacey Abrams, in which we all love. But I believe it's time for us to allow young people the opportunity to lead, whether it's at these protests, whether it's through policy or politics, whether it's through jobs in which they have a corporate America. I witnessed my Spelman sisters who work at corporate companies, in which I won't mention today, write, you know, their statements on Black Lives Matter. I watched my Spelman sisters demand that their companies say Black Lives Matter. You know, that graduated with me in 2019. I witnessed Spelman sisters across the country leading protests, or if they couldn't lead the protest or didn't want to go outside due to COVID-19. I know Jordan, who is from Atlanta, Jordan Walton, that at the rallies that I led, there were water and water stations, and her mother was very, very involved. And so, you know, Spelman women are really making a difference now, and I'm very, very just happy to be amongst those great women. But I honestly believe, and you talked a little bit about my story, I grew up in the civil rights movement, in a civil rights organization, and the civil rights organization is male-led, and not only just the organization, but just the atmosphere, like other organizations in which we work with, very old, and they're preachers. And one of the problems that I always had was speaking out. You know, there were times in which I, as an organizer, would be in a room and, you know, I would often be silenced, or I would silence myself, and I really never understood why. And it wasn't until Spelman that I realized, you know what? No, I'm going to speak my truth. I'm going to say what I want to say. And I'm going to be completely unapologetic about it. And so that is why I believe it's time for us to charge our other Spelman sisters that have been awarded the opportunity to grab this education that has taught us so much, have gotten these fancy jobs, live in these nice homes and fancy cars, and have detached themselves from this movement or from this time, or may feel like it doesn't impact them because it does. And, you know, I'm putting out a charge for you. If you know any of our sisters that aren't doing anything, encourage them to do something. You know, you don't have to march on the front lines like myself or Dr. Spence. I get that we are, you know, foot soldiers, but there are ways in which we can support each other and move this movement forward. I literally can keep talking all day, Dr. Spence, and we'll end up missing the opportunity to have the discussion. So I'll let you start off the discussion.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mary Pat, but I would like for you to share some of your organizing activities, because it takes a lot to organize individuals to come to a march. I mean, we are in a moment. We are in a moment. And some people think it's, well, you know, just call folks up and tell them it's going to be a march and it'll be done. But you've actually had to go out there and kind of survey the landscape. And this isn't your first march, you know, this isn't your first time. I'd like for you to talk about what you've been able to do, but also one of the points that I think intergenerationally, as we think about protests, and again, I'm so happy that you made the point, there are various ways to protest. And so we want to be clear about that. I attended one march. I'm not going out to another march and protest, but I wanted to be there to support Mary Pat. But there are other ways that we can engage protests. And so we talked about these larger structural contexts. So individuals who work within corporate America, individuals who work within the governmental sectors, individuals who are in the law enforcement arena or the healthcare arena. We have oftentimes been silenced. And as you stated, we also self-police. A part of what we do with the Truth, Racial Healing, and Justice framework that's a part of the social justice program is that we tell them, we got to tell the truth first. And the truth may not be comfortable, but we're going to have to deal with the truth before we can actually move to transformation. So can you just talk a little bit about some of the activism that you've been a part of that's really been about truth telling, and how you've had to kind of move through to organize?
So one of the biggest parts about truth telling is speaking to our elected officials. And that's been very, very tough, because one of the unique things, well, I'm actually, I see a lot of my sisters from the East Side. So if you know anything about that, I am in DeKalb County. But one of the beautiful things about Metro Atlanta is the fact that we have Black leadership. And in an environment in which you have Black leadership, oftentimes it's taboo to criticize. It's taboo to hold them accountable for the things in which they do or don't do, especially in this moment that is extremely important. And so in truth telling, you have to know that people are not going to be happy when you hold some of these elected officials accountable. You know, we're talking about police brutality. Well, why is it in Clayton County, where it's all Black leadership, that they have one of the most the highest incarceration rates in the country, right? And the fact that that's contributing a great deal to, you know, the system and putting Black people in the system. And so truth telling has had to be one of the hardest things in which I've had to do, especially because we know how tight-knit Metro Atlanta or the city of Atlanta can be, especially if you're interested in going into politics or anything like that, and just holding people accountable and calling them to the carpet. And again, I can tell you that the class of 2019 is not afraid to call somebody to the carpet. And so I continue to keep that mindset and that energy, and I'm bringing that into this space. Other things is having true conversation amongst each other. You know, when you're in this movement, a lot of people don't realize that we're all not going to agree on certain things. You know, a lot of people have asked me, why are we bringing women's rights into the Black Lives Matter movement? Why are we bringing LGBTQ rights into the Black Lives Matter movement? The reason being is because historically, we have not understood the fact that Black Lives Matter can't matter unless all Black Lives matter. And when you think about the civil rights movement, a lot of Black women were silenced. When you think about the civil rights movement, there was a gay man, a gay Black man who organized the March on Washington, and people do not know his name, and they were silenced. And so you can't decide what goes on the Black agenda, because the Black agenda historically has only benefited Black men. You have to tell the truth and have those uncomfortable conversations. And there were so many times in this movement that we've had those conversations. And then also truth telling. A lot of people will see what's happening on the news and say, these young people aren't organized. That is absolutely and totally not true. We are organized. One of the things outside of just the marches and rallies, we've actually been starting our marches, Dr. Spence knows this, from Atlanta Student Movement Boulevard. And we've done that purposely. But in doing that, we also have sessions in the park where due to social distancing, we'll have tents all along Cleopas R. Johnson Park. And we'll have discussions in each tent regarding how to be an ally, understanding that being an ally is not saying that I'm an ally or showing up to these marches, but living that every day. Like, that's a commitment you have to make to yourself every day, at work, at the gas station, you know, at a restaurant, when you see someone else being, I guess, racially profiled, right? Stepping in, using that privilege when needed. Police brutality, developing policies or things in which we could do, or developing demands to submit to the mayor or the, you know, different people, so that they can understand what we're actually asking for, and then having conversations collectively. I mean, there are 100 groups in Atlanta, in Metro Atlanta right now, and us coming together to say, you know what, these are the demands that all of us are having, and then looking at each of those demands and saying, you know what, these are what are more important right now. This is what we should be focusing on, deciding what those 3 top demands are. And realizing that we can't just be on Keisha Lance Bottom's neck. You know what I'm saying? Like, she's not the only elected official here that we need to be talking about. We need to be going to Clayton County. We need to be going to Loudoun County. We need to be going outside of the city of Atlanta, fighting for these things, because it's not just within the city of Atlanta, and that's not the only place that you have Black people, but going all across the state of Georgia, holding the state accountable, asking other elected officials to adopt initiatives or executive orders that you saw the mayor submit and acknowledge that she's willing to do. So truth-telling has been a very, very big thing, and it's also difficult because you don't want to publicly interrogate or publicly demean another person of color during this time. But at some point, we have to tell ourselves that, you know, if we're going to keep electing and supporting and investing in individuals that look like us, hold these positions of power, then we have to hold them accountable. The name of this discussion is, where do we go from here? And in Dr. Martin Luther King's book, Where Do We Go From Here, he talked about the importance of having both love and power. And right now, we are seeing a lot of people of color with power. But where's the love for the community? Like, you get in these positions of power and you are in love with other positions in which you can get. You're in love with the access that you're able to have, whether it's with the governor or anyone else. You're so in love with, you know, other things in which you're able to gain, but what you've lost is the love for the people that have actually invested in you to be where you are. And so that is something that we're doing. That is something that I'm proud that young people are doing. And it's just important for us to continue to have those conversations with each other and within our community and hold each other accountable.
So absolutely. And the other point that I'll make before we open this up, because we both really are interested in a discussion format, but we clearly, we have our lens targeted on racism and systemic racism, and we're looking at white folks. You know, we're saying they need to stop doing this, they need to stop doing that, and another thing, you know, I have a list every day, and we're engaging with genuine, I believe, in many ways, genuine interest among some white members of the white community to try to gain understanding. And we're doing our very best to help our white brothers and sisters to gain understanding about race and racism and how to be an anti-racist. Again, I've talked a lot about Ibram Kendi's work, but we're looking at Beverly D'Angelo's book, you know, about white fragility. And really, this is a moment where we can do all of that truth-telling with members of the white community. But within our own community, so Mary Pat, you're really talking about what is it that we need to do within our own communities. And we become upset with members of the white community who often will say, well, why you say Black Lives Matter? Why don't you say all lives matter? And certainly there, you know, we have our ready responses for that. But within the Black community, we also, when we say Black Lives Matter, sometimes there's a but There is a but. So it's not all Black lives. We're not talking about all Black lives. We're just talking about Black lives. And so again, within our own communities, we've got to do some housekeeping to be able to build that beloved community that Martin Luther King Jr. talks about. And where do we go from here? But that community building must happen internally as well as externally. And so the truth telling is very important on the outside, because I believe that we actually have individuals who, because of white privilege, have not ever really engaged in serious internal interrogations about whiteness. But I also believe that within the African American community, particularly because we have so many Black folks in leadership positions, we've got to hold them accountable. But we as a people must broaden our net as well to make certain that when we talk about Black lives, we're talking about all Black lives. And we are really looking at the challenges that exist within the classism that exists within our communities, the heterosexism that exists within our communities, the ways in which we privilege certain, the educated versus the uneducated. So again, we have to engage in that, right?
Well, when you mentioned that, Dr. Spence, that was also something that came up because during this time, we know that we did have a Spelman sister and brother that we witnessed on TV that experienced police brutality. But that night, there were other individuals that experienced similar issues. Mm-hmm. And I understand being able to go to a Spelman college, there is a sense of privilege, a sense of privilege that might come with that, yes. Or classism that might come with that. And there are people of color in the city of Atlanta that don't have alumna in high places. Absolutely. And just to be able to see that case was executed so fast, and those cops were fired so fast, that also goes to show you the classism or the elitism of it all. Yes, those officers deserve to be fired. Yes, what happened to those students was absolutely horrific. But we also have to understand that we too hold privilege. And that is something that I have also been talking about. Yeah. And even brought up in a meeting with the mayor when we would discuss that. Because that's true. And when you have privileges such as that, you're supposed to talk about it. You're supposed to call out the elitism that you're witnessing.
Yes, we have to recognize our privilege and use it to the benefit of all individuals. So Danielle, I want to again just recognize Linda and Danielle and Alison in Alumni Affairs, who've been, so instrumental in working on this kind of, I was going to call it a podcast, but this Zoom forum. So thank you all so much for giving us this opportunity. We want to open up the discussion. And so we will, lean upon you to tell us what we need to do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Spence and Mary Pat. The one thing I can off the bat think about is the fact that, sometimes we do hold other people accountable, elected officials, and the fact that we sometimes do need to look within our own community and hold some people that look just like us accountable. So I really, really appreciate all the points that you all brought out, but that's something that just really resonated with me and stuck with me. So I really thank you both. I do have some questions that we received via the registration link. So I'm going to start with those first and then move to the ones that are in the chat. So the first question is, what can we do to combat voter suppression besides just donating to like Fair Fight Georgia? So what can we do?
Yeah. I'll start, but I'm sure, Mary Pat, you have something to say first of all. Well, first of all, we've got to make certain that individuals are registered to vote. We have to make certain that every person that we know is registered to vote and that they are a confirmed registered voter. But the registration is not enough. Then they have to go and they have to vote. And so we've got to, we are really proud about increasing registration, which is wonderful and it is necessary, but we must make certain that individuals are able to access voting on the given dates for voting. We also have to be very, very clear about what's happening in our areas, because if we notice that there's evidence of voter suppression, we need to not just tell my neighbor what happened to me when I went there. We've got to be able to report those instances so that we can, in fact, again, engage in truth telling. So we've got to do our very best, because this upcoming election is very important, as we all know, and I don't have to go into all of those details why, but it isn't just the presidential election that we have to be concerned about. We need to be concerned about who the secretaries of states are, because they're the ones who control voting. We need to be concerned about who the judges are. So we really need to be better educated. And the social justice program actually has 5 different groups that are working collaboratively on voter education and advocacy. And so I'm really proud of those groups. One of the groups is the Andrew Goodman Foundation. And I will say to you that we're very proud that the new executive director is Alexandria Green, who is a Spelman alum. Of course she would be. So again, but Mary Pat, please, because you've been doing some on the ground voter education.
Yes. So one, you talked about reporting incidents that take place during when people are voting. I also work for an organization called the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda that was founded by Reverend Joseph Lowry, specifically on voting. And so if you experience anything, remember the number 866-OUR-VOTE. If you're in line, they're opening up late, if there are no signs out directing people to show them that there's a place to vote, if they're telling people that they can't come in, 866-OUR-VOTE. That's the election protection line. There should also be people that volunteer with election protection to make sure everything is going smoothly, but that's not always the case. And so sometimes we have to be the ones to report this. Another thing that I would say, I know that it's COVID, people are in quarantine. A lot of our elders in the community that normally work at the polls cannot work at the polls. And so there was a huge shortage in people working at the polls. And if they were there, they did not know how to use the new equipment. So if you have a grandchild that is already out, right, going out to eat, out there, say, you know what, since you want to be out there and you want to go out to eat, why don't you go and volunteer at the polls in November and ensure that the lines aren't as long, and, do that. We need more young people working those iPads. We need them ensuring that the process is as smooth as possible. Because in my voting precinct, I vote in off Salem and Panola Road. There were about 2 check-in desks, and none of the women knew how to work the iPads. And it got to a point to where some people didn't even know how to work those machines. And there were hundreds of people in line outside. Myself and my mother were the first people in line to vote. And it took 30 minutes for us to even be able to get checked in. So I couldn't even imagine what it would have been like at 4 or 5 o'clock that day. And so it got to a point to where the woman who was overseeing everything had to just say, everyone stop. And she had to sign people in one by one. So if you have grandchildren, if you know someone, please tell them to go to training. They can reach out to the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. And we're training young people now so that they're aware of how they can be poll workers during the upcoming election. But that is something that we need to ensure that we're not dealing with these problems come election day.
Thank you. So I have another question here. Do you think, in you and Dr. Spencer, you all's opinion, that a Black woman will be selected as VP? And do you think that she will be able to beat or join forces with Joe Biden to beat Donald Trump?
I absolutely do believe right now that a Black woman will be selected. And I believe that whoever is selected will, in fact, be able to join with Vice President Biden to win the election. But that is dependent on us getting out there, expressing our frustrations with the current administration through voting. So we have to go out and vote. It won't happen by itself. You know, we all thought the last election, we said, of course, Donald Trump would not win the election, but he did. And so we must vote. And I do know that this is, and I hope that you all will have another discussion about voting, because I am very much concerned, because there's a lot of disenchantment about voting among some young people. And I'm validating their disenchantment, but we've got to help them understand that one way to exercise your disenchantment is actually to get the people in place who can address the concerns that you're concerned about.
For the time, I'll go on to the next question.
Okay. So the next question is, how do we uplift women organizers and others pushing the movement forward and not be in the shadows of Black men leaders? I think, Mary Pat, you talked about that a little bit earlier.
Yes, I think it's encouraging them to use their voice and call it out. I think there were multiple times Dr. Spence went to my march, and there were men who literally tried to take the stage after I said over and over, this is a space for Black women. And it was a point to where I had to say, listen, man, if you got something you want to say, tell it to the woman beside you. Okay. And we'll let her tell it. But it gets to a point to where you just have to say it, and you have to be, I'm very proud of the women right now who are basically saying, you know, I don't care if I'm deemed angry. I am. I don't care if you are intimidated by my voice. I'm going to take up as much space as possible. They're demanding to be heard, and they're demanding to be seen. And I think that is something that we have to keep on encouraging. And so I think it's also important for us to encourage that next generation. For me, I grew up, I've always had such a loud voice. And, you know, people used to say, you know, well, she's bossy and she's loud. And, you know, there were times in which I tried to, like I talked about earlier, self-police and say, well, maybe I shouldn't take up so much space. Maybe I shouldn't be so loud. But I learned growing up that it was bossy women like Melanie Campbell and Helen Butler and Cynthia Neal Spence and so on and so on that changed the world. And so they should be unapologetically them and speak out. And I know we're seeing this, but if there are women in which you know that are dealing with that in all aspects of corporate America or wherever they are, encourage them to use their voice and encourage them to speak up.
Yeah. Excellent.
Excellent. I'm going to go to a question that was placed in the chat, and it is, can you speak more about the intersectionality as it relates to the movement? How do we share the same platform while at the same time discussing the messages inherent with Black movement and the many others that align?
Okay. So I'll start, and Mary Pat, I want you to join in. But first of all, I want us to always understand that, first of all, Black people, we're not flat. You know, we're not a flat surface. We are very complicated beings. And when we approach our understanding, not just of ourselves as a group of people, but of anyone, we must operate within an intersectional frame. So I see you, Danielle, on the screen. You are a Black woman, but I don't know anything about your class. I don't know anything at all about your religion. I don't know anything about your gender identity. I don't know those things. And I don't, you know, there's a lot more. I don't know about your education. I don't know any of that. But in order for me to respect who you are, I need to recognize that you're not just a Black woman in front of me, that you are a Black woman who brings simultaneous experiences that are based upon your varied identities. And so when we are talking about a movement, we talk about a Black movement. Well, whose Black movement? Who are you talking about? Are you talking about Black movement that just represents the concerns of Black males? Are you talking about Black movement, the concerns that addresses the concerns of Black females? Who are you talking about? And I think as educated people, We should always ask when they say, well, you know, Black women do this. You need to say, well, what Black women? Which Black women are you talking about? What Black men? Who are you talking about? Because that's the way we engage an intersectional frame. And what we know is that the varied identities that we occupy bring with them experiences. Mary Pat talked about privilege. I might be treated a certain way because my name is Dr. Cynthia Neal Spence and I'm a Black woman, but somebody else who may in fact be very much like me but doesn't have the doctor on their name, they may be treated very differently because there's a class issue there. So again, we are complicated beings and we need to always operate as if everything is complicated. And so never do these monolithic statements, all Black people, all men, all women, we can't do it. We can't do it. And as educated people, we need to always ask the question, what men, what women, what movement, who are you talking about? What moment in history are you talking about as we are engaging in these discussions?
I agree 100%, Dr. Spence. And remember, in having these conversations, when you're on Facebook, when you're on the phone, continue to talk about the intersectionality of it all, and continue to keep that at the front of people's mind, because all Black people are not the same. Right. And, you know, that's just important. But I think Pamela asked a question, 866 Our Vote. Yes, 866 Our Vote is for all across the country. It's not just for the state of Georgia. So if you're experiencing voter suppression anywhere in the world, please call 866 Vote and they'll be able to assist.
And Mary Pat, can you speak a little bit about, I know you mentioned it earlier, in reference to more young people becoming more involved as poll workers. And I know one concern that was raised in the chat is that how is it that you have some poll workers that are not, you know, as technically savvy with using the new equipment that they have out?
To answer that question, I have no idea, but they have the job. And I question why a lot of people have the jobs that they have. But listen, they have these jobs. They don't know how to use the machines. Many of them were just thrown into these positions and were quickly given the jobs because they were short poll workers and did not receive the proper training in which they needed. And so that is why we experience a lot of things in which we have experienced. And then honestly, sometimes when you're not familiar with certain technology, you might hear or see something once, and then you might try to do it again and you might forget. And so it's important for us to encourage people, not just young people, but anyone who is tech savvy, but I want people to be safe due to COVID. And so if people are out there living their best lives, tell them to live their best lives as poll workers on election day, who know how to use technology. There are organizations like the People's Agenda who have access to the training that are training poll workers. And of course, you'll have to go through the training again through your actual county. But we just want people to be as prepared as possible. So one, that they can get the job, and two, they could be great at the job on election day.
Okay, well, we're gonna wrap it up at this point, and I want to thank you both for being a part of this discussion. We have had so much activity in our chat, and you all have provided us with so much information regarding voting. I'm gonna turn it over to my colleague, Linda Hart-Patton. She's gonna give us some closing remarks as well.
I was so enthralled with the conversation. It took me a minute to find my mute button. I'm sorry. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so very much for joining us today. This is our 5th Sister Soul Circle session, and when the idea first came up from the team, we thought, well, we'll try it in June and just see how it works. Well, we now have July session, and we're looking at an August session. So I think we struck gold. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to have our space. Sometimes you just need your space to be able to say what you need to say, to be able to think about what's happening in your life and have other like-minded folks who at least understand what you're saying. and you don't have to necessarily explain everything. You just want to get it off your chest. So I thank you all for joining us today, and please look for more of our sessions to come. And just thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being a part. We will also, and we ask, if you could please fill out our survey for us. It's very brief. And if nothing else, we really want to hear your thoughts and your feelings on how these sessions have been going, what you got out of this, and if you have any ideas of something else that we could bring in terms of topics for discussion. Because what we definitely identified, we knew this. We didn't need a sister soul circle session to understand that everything we need is right within our sisterhood. Everything you can possibly think of is right here. And it's just a matter of tapping in. And that's exactly what these sessions were all about, is being able to tap into that sisterhood no matter where you are in the world, so that we can continue to help each other through self-care and self-love. Because every conversation we have in these sessions, really and truly, is about caring for yourself. And if there wasn't another time in the history of the world that we need to make sure we're taking care of ourselves, it's right now. Because once we take care of ourselves, then we can take care of our families. We can take care about everybody else. So, I don't want it right now. All lives matter. Yeah, we need to worry about our lives, and let's worry about Black lives. And then we can talk about everybody else's life. Let's worry about that right now. So thank you very much. That's enough. I'm starting to feel the spirit. I was about to preach. So I will go ahead and end and allow Danielle to close us out.
Thank you so much, Linda. I could sense you feeling the spirit as well. So on the screen, you'll see Mary Pat's information. If you want to follow her, she, again, is doing so much. As a matter of fact, I think Friday we were on the call and she was organizing, she was on the go. So she just follow her social media, find out what she's doing. You can also go to her website and read her full bio. So if you go to Mary Pat's website, you can see her full bio as well as some of the other things that she's doing. So I encourage you to definitely check out her social media handles. We also have Dr. Cynthia Spence, of course. So we have her email address as well as her social media handle on IG is @Spelman Social Justice. You can follow her there as well as you can check out her on the internet as well. All of their contact information will be shared with you via a post-event survey, so definitely check it out. We'll also add some links to resources. Some of the things that they mentioned in their presentation will be available to you later on in a few days. And that concludes everything. Again, you will receive a post-event survey. Please it just only takes a few minutes to complete it so that we can, get all of your positive feedback and information so that we can help to get prepared for our next series of Sister Soul Circle. Again, we have next Sunday, and we have throughout the entire month of July. I will be your host, and I do apologize for any technical difficulties early on, but I will be your host for the rest of the month of July. I look forward to seeing you all. Thank you so much for being a part of Sister Soul Circle.